Pronoun case and perspective. In order to understand pronoun case, you first must understand subjects and objects. Subjects and objects are both nouns, but they play different roles in terms of the structure of the sentence. Nouns that take verbs are called subjects. Nouns that do not take verbs are called objects. Let me give you an example.
Captain Jones waved around his saber and threatened the landlubbers.
We have three nouns in this sentence: Captain Jones, saber, and landlubbers. Which noun is the subject in this sentence? In order to find the subject of a sentence, we first find the verbs. In this case, waved and threatened. So we ask ourselves, who or what waved and threatened? Captain Jones. Captain Jones takes the verbs waved and threatened, and that makes him the subject. The other two nouns, saber and landlubbers, do not take verbs in this sentence, so they are objects. Pronoun case. Pronouns change based on how they're used, whether they're used as subjects or objects in a sentence. Here's an example.
I taught myself to skateboard when nobody else would teach me.
We have three pronouns in this sentence: I, myself, and me. They all refer to the speaker. So when do we use I? When do we use me? And when do we use myself? I hope that by the end of this lesson you'll be able to better answer this question. Subjective pronouns. Subjective pronouns are pronouns that take a verb. All pronouns take the place of nouns in sentences, but we should use subjective pronouns when it's taking the place of a noun that is functioning as the subject of a sentence. Here are the subjective pronouns:
I, we, you, he, she, it, they.
And here is an example of subjective pronouns being used in a sentence.
When we arrived in the new country, we were bearing gifts for the natives.
We is a pronoun that is taking place of a group of nouns. Since in this sentence that group of nouns is taking the verb arrived and were bearing, we use the subjective pronoun we rather than the objective form. Objective pronouns are pronouns that do not take verbs. The objective pronouns are
Me, us, you, it, him, her, them.
We use objective pronouns when they are taking the place of noun or nouns that do not take verbs. Here's an example of a sentence using objective pronouns.
The natives were delighted to meet us.
The verb in this sentence is were. The subject, natives. The natives were. Us is a pronoun that is replacing a group of nouns that does not take an action in this sentence, that does not take a verb. Therefore, we use the objective form us rather than the subjective form we. Reflexive pronouns. Reflexive pronouns are a little bit trickier than subjective and objective pronouns, but I think you'll get the hang of it. The key here is that reflexive pronouns must refer or reflect back on the subject of the sentence. That is why they're called reflexive pronouns, because they reflect back to the subject. The reflexive pronouns are
myself, ourselves, yourself, yourselves, himself, herself, themselves, itself.
We can only use these correctly when they are referring back to the subject of the sentence. Here is an example of a reflexive pronoun being used correctly.
Tommy the turkey didn't want to be by himself anymore, so he was happy to be invited to our table.
Himself is taking the place of Tommy the turkey's name. We don't use the subjective form he because in this part of the sentence it's not taking an action, and we do not use the objective pronoun him because we're referring back to the subject, which is Tommy the turkey. Therefore, we must use the reflexive pronoun himself. A lot of times people try using reflexive pronouns like myself, perhaps to sound proper, but that is not how they're used. Myself can only be used after I or me or the speaker's name when it's referring back to the subject of the sentence. Choosing the right pronouns can be a little tricky. The key is to use subjective pronouns as subjects and objective pronouns as objects. Most people can do this when there's just one subject in the sentence, but when there's more than one, it can get a little tricky. The key is to slow down and ask yourself, did I do this? Or did he do this? Or did it happen to me or him? Here are some examples.
Jenna went to the watering hole.
Here, I is the correct use of the pronoun. But oftentimes you may hear people saying things like, Jed and me went to the mall, or Jed and me went somewhere. And that is not the correct use. If we were to remove Jed's name, though, it would be a lot easier. Most people wouldn't say, me went to the mall, or me went to the swimming hole. But when we add another person's name in there, when we add another subject, people tend to make the mistake of using incorrect pronoun case. Here's another example.
The teacher gave me and Karen a hall pass.
So we find a predicate, gave, the verb, gave. We ask ourselves, who gave? The teacher. Since the teacher is the subject, we need to use the objective pronoun, me. Me and Karen don't do anything in this sentence. That's why we use the objective form. Rather, the teacher gives me and Karen the hall pass. Me is the correct form. Again, by removing the other person's name, it might be easier. You wouldn't say, the teacher gave I a hall pass. You would say, the teacher gave me a hall pass. But for some reason, when we add another person's name in there, it tends to confuse people. Here's one more tricky example.
She is taller than I.
This is a comparative sentence, and you can usually tell these by the word than. Oftentimes, it seems like we should use the objective pronoun me rather than the subjective pronoun I because the speaker is not taking any actions. The verb is refers to the subject she. But the trick here is that there's another part of the sentence that's implied. It's not stated, but it exists. This sentence is really saying, she is taller than I am. The am is implied. Therefore, we need to use the subjective pronoun I, rather than the objective pronoun me. You wouldn't say, she is taller than me am, but we would say, she is taller than me, and be incorrect about it. She is taller than I is correct form. These comparative sentences are a little tricky, but if you're aware of them, you'll start getting them right. They're usually signaled by the word than, and we're making a comparison between two parties. In that case, we need to use the subjective form of the pronoun for the latter party. So that's pronoun case. But there's also pronoun perspective. Pronouns can be either first, second, or third person. Here are the first person pronouns.
I, me, my, myself, we, our, ours, ourselves.
One thing that helps me remember first person pronouns is by imagining one person on a desert island. If that one person were on a desert island, he or she would be communicating to his or herself like this. I'm going to get a coconut. I'm by myself on this island. I am very bored. When we have one person, we use the pronoun I, and I is a first person pronoun. We also have second person pronouns. Here are the second person pronouns.
You, your, yours, yourself, yourselves.
So a first person pronoun is just one person on an island. To remember second person pronouns, I usually imagine two people, and the one person is talking to the other person, and he or she is saying, hey you there, what are you doing? Do you need help? Do you want to hang out? Do you want to talk to me? You is the second person pronoun. And if the first person were talking to the second person, he or she would probably be using the word you to communicate with him or her. That's how I remember second person pronoun. There's also third person pronoun. Here are the third person pronouns.
He, she, it, him, her, his, hers, himself, herself, itself, they, them, their, theirs, themselves.
I remember third person pronoun by thinking of two people, the first person and the second person, talking about a third person. And those two people would be talking about the third person like this. Well, she doesn't even look good in that dress. I can't believe she came by herself. Look what she is wearing. I don't want to hang out with her. She thinks she's so cool. And that might be how two people were to speak about a third person, by using the words he or she. Now that's not perfect, it's just a little trick I use to help me remember the difference between first, second, and third person, and I hope it helps you too. Pronoun perspective. Let's start from left to right, top to bottom. So let's go from left to right, top to bottom. First focusing on the first person pronouns. The first person pronouns that are subjects, or in subjective case, are I and we. The first person pronouns that are objective case are me and us. And the first person pronouns that are reflexive case are myself and ourselves. The second person pronoun that is in subjective case is you. In objective case, it is also you, which makes it pretty hard to mess up. But in reflexive case, it can be either yourself or yourselves. Third person pronoun subjective case is he, she, they, or it. Third person pronoun in objective case, him, her, them, it. And third person pronouns in reflexive case are himself, herself, themselves, or itself. Here are some more examples of pronoun case.
My dad and we're planting a tree for Earth Day.
Do we need a subjective or objective pronoun to best complete the sentence? To answer this question, look for the verbs. In this case, we have a verb phrase, were planting. So we ask ourselves, who was planting? My dad and blank. So we need a subject pronoun. We need a subject pronoun that will take the verb here to complete this sentence properly. Here's another example of pronoun case.
Alyssa was pleased when the teacher put and Ahmad in a group.
Do we need a subjective or objective pronoun to best complete this sentence? Again, start by finding the verb. The verb here is was, so we ask ourselves, who was Alyssa? Alyssa is the subject. Since there are no other verbs here, we're going to need an objective pronoun to complete this sentence. And here's one more example of pronoun case.
The patient tried to run from Nurse Christie, but was faster than.
Do we need subjective or objective pronouns to complete this last sentence? This one's a bit trickier. Well, let's find the verbs. The verbs here are tried, the patient tried, so the patient is a subject, and was. Since we have a blank before was, we're going to need a subjective pronoun. What about after than? Do we need an objective pronoun after than? Do we say he or she was faster than her? No. We would say he or she is faster than she, because the implication here is faster than she was. Was is implied. Again, we have a comparative sentence here, marked by the word than. When we're comparing two parties, we use a subjective pronoun after the word than. In review, subjective pronouns take verbs. Objective pronouns do not take verbs. Reflexive pronouns reflect back on the subject. With a little practice, I'm sure that you'll master this skill.